farther. So there is that. Otherwise, I don't really see it being a big deal or anything worth doing. And it says that it's not possible for the USSR to intervene if Xingkang is aligned with the KMT. So basically, he's got a very narrow window to pull that off. So he's got to make that decision really early in the game. So, you know, if he's not going to try to have Sun Shi come this way and get next to adjacent to a Russian possessed territory that way, then maybe that makes sense. He goes, all right, I'm going to just go take Xingkang, and I'm going to try to recruit that guy, and then recruit these others, and I'm not going to worry about Xingkang. I'm not going to worry about getting that +2 bonus income per turn. And that, okay, I can see that. Otherwise, he's, you know, like I said, a very narrow window of opportunity to kind of make that decision. So I don't know whether I really see that one even happening a whole lot. Okay, and then the two last ones are, if any outside attacks, if any Chinese land zone is attacked by an outside non-Chinese nation, Japan, all Chinese warlords will align with either the CCP or the KMT. If a warlord is bordering a CCP-possessed land zone, roll a d12. On a 1 through 6, it aligns with the CCP. On a 7 through 12, it aligns with the KMT. If a warlord is not bordering a CCP-possessed land zone, it automatically aligns with KMT. So, this has some interesting implications. So right off the bat, let's say they never break out and these warlords are still valid, then it has two roles to either recruit this warlord or this warlord into the CCP and keep CCP in the fight, rather than just sitting there with that one territory turn after turn after turn. And so I really like it for that reason, because I've talked earlier about how Japan will come in and it's possible for them to lock all the warlords into the KMT if they're worried about a runaway CCP. I much prefer this. And I actually would argue with my players, I would like to see this become part of the basic rule set. This even if we don't play with this expansion, I would like to see this played with as part of the basic game. Because I think otherwise it's not hard for the CCP to be screwed over very early in the game by an early Japanese attack. So what this does, though, it gives them incentive to possibly break out earlier. Now, in some ways, it also incentivizes the argument I made about going this direction first. Because you get this roll, you get these guys, great. But you don't have a chance to roll for anybody else, or you keep on missing them, and then Japan comes in and these guys align with the KMT. But if you go here first and you recruit Singhai, now on the following turn, just for example, we'll say Japan attacks. Japan attacks. Now, because this is CCP-controlled territory, the CCP gets a roll for this warlord, this warlord, this warlord, and this warlord. And then let's take it another step. Maybe he recruits Singhai. Then the following turn he recruits Yunnan. And then Japan attacks. Well, now he's rolling for this, and Kwangtung down here. So, in some ways, I think this rule makes it almost more worth it for the CCP to come after Singhai first. That's how I see it. Even though, obviously it's going to be lower odds. So I really like that rule. It definitely, and on the flip side, maybe that forces because the CCP player does do that, it forces the KMT player to say, no, I don't want to run that risk. I'm going to try and take Singhai back. So you're only rolling for that one warlord up there. So it creates kind of a jockeying position where now both sides, they're not just jockeying for control of the country, but they're jockeying for the chance at good gains on a lucky die roll when the Japan comes in. So I really like that. So the opium trade. Place one opium marker each in Afghanistan, in Sichuan, and in, what was the other one? Cochin, China, which is down here. If CCP, KMT, or the USSR possess any of these land zones, they get one additional IPP bonus income. Other nations are not eligible to get this bonus. So I like this. I think that it's cool. Sichuan is not worth anything really to the KMT, but it is worth something to the CCP. It's worth it for Russia to possibly go into Afghanistan at this point. Possibly, I'm not sure. It still doesn't have a printed IPP value, so I still don't think it would count as a victory point. But if they see a chance to, but if you're a Russian player and your idea is, let me just go out there and grab up all those IPPs to start with and push the border back a little bit and then be in a better, have a better income when the real war starts over there, well then that's, that makes that brings Afghanistan possibly into play at that point. And I like that. And I like that. And I like that it's not worth it to the nations that wouldn't take part in the opium trade. So how do I feel about this expansion? I think this is a really good expansion. I think it creates a lot of really interesting situations for players to think about. I think the way a lot of the rules are handled are very good and straightforward. There's not a whole lot of confusion with most of them. Now, if you can get really nitpicky about the wording of rules, like I admit I can, mainly because of my legal background, yeah, I have asked for some clarifications on a couple points in this. There's one thing that I was expecting to see in this expansion but didn't, was the blowing the dams of the Yellow River. I expected that to be an option for the KMT player, or possibly the CCP player, depending on who controls what territory. No, it wasn't in there. And in one of the emails, I kind of asked the chief designer about it. He said, nope, it's just not in the scope of this. I'm like, oh, okay. Now, just for historical references, that's still the greatest wartime ecological, it's still the largest use of ecological warfare in history. And if you're not familiar with that, just look it up. They blew some dams to flood huge sections out here. And those dams were never rebuilt till like 1955. That's how lasting the effect was. And it slowed down the Japanese army's advance, killed a lot of people, made a lot of people hate the KMT and decide to go side with Japan, a lot of locals. And it made a lot of people decide who didn't like Japan go, well, if that's how the KMT is going to act, I'm going to go join the CCP. So it really had this interesting effect on, it was an interesting thing. I was surprised it wasn't in the expansion, but you know what? Whatever. Not the end of the world. But everything else in this expansion is really great, and I'm not even saying a lot of the options that are given to players are going to be used often or in every game, but it's the kind of expansion that you can add to a game, and it won't necessarily have a huge impact. It doesn't have to necessarily have a huge impact. It might not. Obviously, I talked about some options that become very efficient for the Allies to do, and if they really kind of play that up. Now, when I also talk about expansions, each individually, I'll kind of talk about which faction or which nation do they benefit more than other nations, because expansions aren't necessarily designed to be balanced, and that's fine. They don't need to be designed to be balanced. But I also want to point out, now obviously this expansion greatly helps China across the board and makes life way more difficult for Japan. Japan doesn't get anything out of this. So it really helps China. Really, it also helps the CCP it helps Russia to a lesser extent, and the Comintern to a lesser extent, rather than China overall. But I think that when you look at the individual factions within China, the CCP and the KMT, I actually think it's fairly balanced at that point. When you take into account all the pros and cons of each nation. Yeah, the CCP won't be able to get as many elite units in the game as the KMT, but then the KMT already suffer from attack weakness, and then the CCP get an extra bonus for getting an elite guy. So it gives them incentive to kind of maybe try to break out early. So yeah, I think it's a really good expansion. This is one that I would not hesitate to play with, because right now my group is still at the point where we're not really playing with any expansions. We are playing with some house rules, and we are playing with most of the optional rules that we like. But we're kind of like, now let's not play with any expansions yet. Let's talk about that down the line. This is one that if somebody said, let's play with China at War, okay, I don't have any problems with that. Let's play with that. I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't worry about how it would imbalance the game. So yeah, that's an example of, I think, a good expansion. Even though it does favor one side more than the other in terms of it favors China and can really stymie Japan coming in. That's not a guaranteed thing. So yeah, I like this expansion. I'm really happy with it, and this is kind of my impressions on it. I'm hoping to get to play with it at some point, so I can give maybe kind of do a follow-up to this video and go, okay, here's some other things that kind of popped up that we went, oh yeah, that's fantastic, let's do that. So yeah, for the time being, this is Wintermute signing off. If you want to add anything, think I missed anything or misspoke, then leave a comment below.